Year 9, 10 and 11, welcome to some Band 6, Grade 7, 8 and 9 notes on Sheila Birling. So it's not everything you need, it's not the basic things you need, it's how we can move up through the grades to be hitting the top end. So the first thing we're going to look at here is that she transforms from the infantile capitalist to a passionate socialist. One of the first stage directions when discussing Sheila in the play is half serious and half playful. Now, that actually is very similar to Eric, who is described as half shy and half assertive. So we can see actually that Priestley is setting these two characters up as our younger generation who can possibly change the future. The word half obviously suggests they're in between something. And we've got this sense of unease. This is a celebration, remember. And then when we look at our adjectives, there's a massive juxtaposition between serious and playful. And what that does is, it foreshadows the inspector arriving, but it serves to undermine her relationship with Gerald. And the other interpretation, because remember we get a lot of respect for having alternative interpretations, is there is a suggestion that capitalism and the beliefs of Mr. and Mrs. Birling unsettle Sheila. And I suppose in that way we can see that she is going to be the first character that changes. We are also told in the stage direction that she is very pleased with life. And this is showing us the ignorance of Sheila. She is ignorant not only to the lower classes, but of her own actions. And she's unable to see past inequality and mistreatment. And in this line, if we look again at language, the adverb very modifies pleased and actually serves to heighten and exaggerate the ignorance of Sheila to the real world and what's going on in the real world, because she's stuck in this bubble, the bubble of being rich. How do we know that? The setting of this play never changes. So we have got this idea that the Birlings are stuck in their ways. And when referring to Mr. and Mrs. Birling in the opening of the play, she refers to them as mummy and daddy with colloquialisms, again exaggerating this bubble that she can't see the harsh realities of life. As the play progresses, this juxtaposes with mother and father, and later in the play she addresses them in that way, a lot more formal, a lot more serious standard English. Mother, stop it. She is now, later on in the play, when she's addressing them with mother and father, she now has the ability to stand up to them and to come into conflict with their political beliefs, their moral beliefs, their beliefs about society. Also, there might be an argument as well that mummy, daddy, mother, father is almost subtly reminding us that Eva Smith has no parents. Remember, her mum and dad have died. We must not forget as well that this is a morality play. It's not just a political message. There's a moral message being shown to the audience by Priestley, and he uses the 7 deadly sins to do that. And for Sheila, she metaphorically represents the sin of envy, because she is jealous that Eva Smith holds up the dress and looks nicer than her, and therefore she gets her fired, which is again immature behaviour, spiteful behaviour. She then arguably dehumanises Eva when she uses the noun creature, and therefore unfortunately aligns herself with Eric and Gerald, who have also went through the play dehumanising her. And what that then does is further segregates the classes, which is Priestley's problem, that there was a massive gulf between the lower classes, the working classes, and the upper classes because of capitalism. At the beginning of the play, Sheila is also materialistic, and the engagement ring symbolises that. She says, now I really feel engaged, and she places importance on the ring. The adverb now has implications that the perfect ring is the reason for her feelings. As if, oh, now I feel engaged because you've given me this ring. And she says, mummy, isn't it a beauty? And that obviously is going to contrast with the end of the play when she says to Gerald, you're pretending everything is just as it was before. Again, look at your language. We've got pretending versus really. So we've got the juxtaposition of the Sheila's world is colliding. The real world is colliding with her idealistic world that was built on wealth. She does avoid being a typical Edwardian woman, and she is reluctant to become submissive. As I mentioned earlier, she's the first character change. Eva is not present, so again we've got gender roles that we can question, and again the disparity of the classes is clear, because Eva Smith, our metaphorical voice of the lower classes, becomes voiceless in the sense that she can't defend herself. She doesn't actually appear in the play in terms of speaking. So again, we've got this metaphorical idea that she's unimportant. As the play progresses, the stage directions for Sheila worsen, and we get distressed and we get horrified, and actually at the end she's frightened. There's an emotional response in distress, isn't there? And then it becomes horrified. So she is horrified when she hears that Eva was pregnant, and then this is going to become she's frightened. So she accepts the consequences of her actions and her lifestyle, because she is haunted by Inspector Gould to change, isn't she? We know that Sheila is highly distressed from the way she reacts at the beginning, when the way she reacts to the fact that Eva Smith has burnt herself inside out. The socialism that Sheila eventually believes in is foreshadowed from the beginning when she defends Eva. After she hears what Mr. Birling has said, she says they're not cheap labour, they're people. This foreshadows the idea that underneath it all, she believes in socialism, but she hides it under the guise of the pressures of Mr. and Mrs. Birling. But again, we're unsettled as an audience by the language used. Yes, we could analyse cheap and we could analyse labour, but actually the pronoun they serves to detach, serves as detachment again, that at this moment in the play in Act 1, Sheila hasn't fully shown empathy towards Eva Smith and towards those less fortunate. She's perceptive. She is the only character that understands the inspector's power. She realises that the actions of the upper class are immoral. She thinks it's ridiculous to try and mislead the inspector. And she contrasts with Mrs. Birling here, which is an example of the Oedipus complex. If you haven't done the Oedipus complex before, there's different theories on the Oedipus complex. I am not talking about the sexual theory. I am talking about the challenging of authority theory. And there's a belief that the Oedipus complex, one of the Oedipus complexes, is that you challenge the same-sex parent. So when she says, "Mother, stop it," Sheila is showing us an aspect of the Oedipus complex where she challenges Mrs. Birling, much like Eric challenges Mr. Birling. And the Oedipus complex metaphorically represents the conflict between Labour and the Conservative parties and socialism and capitalism. And don't forget, the upper class have raped, stolen and lied. Again, in terms of moral quality, she respects Gerald for being honest, and this is the moment where we see Sheila placing moral value above social position, which Mrs. Birling is unable to do, and she ends up massively frustrated with her parents because they don't learn. And she recognises that it doesn't matter if the inspector was real or not, because they still behaved immorally and they still mistreated someone. And she is part of the younger generation who existed at the birth of the welfare state, this idea of socialism, inequality, which was created by the Labour Party. And the inspector points out that the younger generation are impressionable. When we take that to society, then again, Priestley's message here is that the younger generation have the power to improve our world for the better. To show the full influence of the inspector, Sheila's language begins to parallel and mirror that of Gould. So the inspector says, if men will not learn that lesson, then they will be taught it in fire, blood and anguish. And then Sheila says, I remember how he looked and what he made me feel. Fire, blood and anguish. So she firmly aligns herself with him. And then, sorry, I haven't finished that sentence. As an audience in the 1940s, we would be looking at her beliefs and his beliefs as something that we value. Okay, so her language starts to align with the inspector, again, fully accepting the lessons that he is trying to teach. More to add on to language as well is she distances herself from Mr. and Mrs. Birling when she starts to use the pronoun you. It's very accusatory. She addresses them with disdain at the end. She is ashamed of them. Again, ask yourself if Priestley's sending another message about society who mistreat the most vulnerable. Again, Oedipus Complex standing up to Mrs. Birling. Then metaphorically, she's challenging the beliefs, the moral beliefs, the social beliefs of Mr. and Mrs. Birling here. And again, we've got this conflict politically and morally. And obviously, slowly but surely, she shows empathy for Eva Smith. You mustn't try to build up a kind of wall between us and that girl. If you do, then the inspector will break it down, and it'll be all the worse when he does. She refuses to take the inspector as being fake or humorous when she says it's anything but a joke. So when Mr. and Mrs. Birling begin to celebrate again at the end of the play, Sheila just won't, because she knows that she has done that to someone. She feels guilty. She is responsible. Please check out my YouTube channel. There's a video on there. There's a grade 9 response to Sheila, a full essay. There's grade 9 response to Gerald, a grade 9 response to Eric. Just type Stacey Ray into YouTube. A massive good luck in your English literature exam.